The heart monitor screamed first. Then the crash echoed down the bright hospital corridor, louder than the morning announcements, louder than the hum of machines keeping fragile lives together. And in the middle of it all lay a pregnant nurse, motionless on the polished floor, her hand still clutching a patient's chart as if responsibility itself had pulled her down. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in miracles that arrive when we least expect them, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel, Kindness Journal. Your support keeps these stories alive. It was just past 9 in the morning when the sun streamed through the tall windows of Crestview Medical Center, painting everything in a soft gold glow that felt almost deceptive. The day shift had begun with its usual rush. Nurses moved swiftly, doctors reviewed charts, families whispered prayers. Among them was Marisela Quinn, 7 months pregnant and determined to prove that she could still handle the demanding pace of the cardiac wing. Her rounded belly was impossible to hide beneath her pale blue scrubs, but her steady hands and warm smile reassured everyone who crossed her path. Marisela had always been the nurse who stayed a little longer, who remembered birthdays, who braided elderly patients' hair and tucked blankets around trembling shoulders. She had grown up caring for her younger siblings after her mother passed away, and compassion had become as natural to her as breathing. When she discovered she was expecting her first child after years of believing she couldn't conceive, she treated the tiny life inside her like a miracle entrusted to her care. Yet she also refused to give up the job that had defined her purpose. That morning, room 312 held a man named Alaric Dane, a middle-aged mechanic who had been in a coma for nearly 3 weeks after a severe cardiac arrest. Machines breathed for him, fed him, monitored him. His wife visited every day, clutching his rough hand and whispering stories of their grandchildren. The doctors had begun to speak in cautious tones about long-term outcomes. But Marisela never spoke of him as if he were already gone. She cleaned his face gently, adjusted his pillows, and updated him on the weather as though he were simply resting. Her colleagues had noticed she seemed more tired lately. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she sometimes pressed a hand to her lower back when she thought no one was watching. Pregnancy had not been easy. There were dizzy spells she dismissed as normal, headaches she powered through, swelling she ignored. She told herself that women before her had worked in far harsher conditions. She told herself she could endure a few more weeks until maternity leave. Late that morning, as she stood beside Alaric's bed checking his 4 lines, a wave of lightheadedness rolled over her. The room tilted slightly. She gripped the railing, willing the spinning to stop. She thought of her baby's tiny kicks from earlier that day and whispered a silent promise that she would rest after this shift. But the promise came too late. A sharp pain tightened across her abdomen, and the world dissolved into white noise. Outside the room, another nurse heard the metallic thud. By the time the team rushed in, Marisela was on the floor, pale and unresponsive. Her head had narrowly missed the corner of a cabinet. One hand rested protectively over her stomach. The monitors around Alaric's bed began to beep erratically, as if protesting the sudden chaos. What happened next would be told and retold in that hospital for years. As staff knelt around Marisela, checking her pulse and calling for obstetrics, a change flickered across the screen attached to Alaric's bed. His heart rhythm shifted. His eyelids, still for weeks, trembled. At first, no one noticed. All attention was on the fallen nurse and the life inside her. But then one of the residents gasped. Alaric's fingers moved. It was not dramatic, not like in the movies. It was a slight curl, a faint tightening around the bedsheet. Yet it was enough to send another nurse to his side. His heart rate strengthened, stabilizing in a pattern that had been absent since his collapse. His brain activity spiked in response to the commotion. The alarms forced a split in focus. 2 emergencies, 1 room. As doctors worked to rouse Marisela, calling her name and monitoring the baby's heartbeat, Alaric's eyes slowly opened. They were unfocused at first, drifting across the ceiling lights. Then they shifted toward the cluster of people surrounding the nurse who had cared for him so faithfully. Later, staff would say it was as if something in him recognized her. Alaric tried to move his mouth. No words came, but a strained sound escaped his throat. The sudden awakening triggered a cascade of medical responses. With his regained consciousness, doctors were able to assess neurological function and confirm that he was responsive. The surge in activity allowed them to divert additional personnel into the room without fear of losing him. Meanwhile, Marisela's condition became clearer. Her blood pressure had plummeted due to a previously undetected complication related to her pregnancy. She needed immediate intervention to stabilize both her and the baby. The presence of the full cardiac team, already assembled because of Alaric's sudden revival, meant there was no delay. Specialists who would have been elsewhere in the building were right there. Within minutes, she was on a gurney, oxygen secured, 4 fluids running. As they wheeled her out, Alaric's eyes followed. A single tear slid down the side of his face, disappearing into the pillow. Hours later, the hospital buzzed with cautious relief. Marisela had been stabilized. The baby's heartbeat remained strong and steady. Doctors decided to keep her under close observation, but the immediate danger had passed. In another wing, Alaric spoke his first raspy words since the incident that had nearly taken his life. He asked what had happened, why his throat hurt, why everyone looked at him as though he had returned from somewhere far away. When they told him about the nurse who collapsed in his room, about how his awakening had drawn in the team that ultimately saved her and her unborn child, he wept openly. He insisted on knowing her name. He insisted on seeing her as soon as she was able. Days later, in the soft afternoon light of a recovery room, Marisela sat propped up in bed, one hand resting on her stomach. Alaric, weaker but fully conscious, was wheeled in. No grand speeches were made. No dramatic declarations filled the air. But gratitude moved between them in quiet waves. She had cared for him when he could not respond. And somehow, in the moment she needed saving, his body had chosen to fight its way back. The hospital staff began calling it a miracle. Some said it was coincidence, a convergence of timing and trained professionals. Others believed it was something deeper, a reminder that kindness given freely has a way of circling back when we least expect it. Marisela returned home weeks later on early maternity leave, instructed firmly to rest. She often thought about that morning, about the golden sunlight and the terrifying fall. She also thought about how close everything had come to being different. Her daughter was born healthy on a bright spring day, her cry filling the delivery room with the same fierce determination her mother carried. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and leave a comment. Stories of hope deserve to be spread, especially in a world that sometimes feels heavy. And here is a special request before we end: please comment with the word hope if you believe that kindness always finds its way back. Alaric eventually walked out of Crestview Medical Center under his own strength. He returned often, not as a patient, but as a volunteer who repaired broken wheelchairs and fixed squeaky doors. Marisela visited the cardiac wing months later, her baby cradled in her arms, and stood once more in room 312. The machines were gone. The sunlight was the same. In the end, it was not just a story about a nurse who collapsed or a man who woke from a coma. It was a story about unseen threads connecting people, about compassion that plants seeds long before we understand their purpose. And on an ordinary morning filled with ordinary light, those seeds bloomed into a miracle that saved 2 lives at once.